All right, folks, let's go ahead and get started. I want to welcome you to how to prepare for the fair. We've got a few good words for you, just good information for you. We've got a few slides before we start the regular part of the presentation. My name is Brian Rowe. I'm one of the staff members in the AU Career Center. We're the office that's hosting the fair this time around, as we usually do. And as you know, it's virtual. You'll see on the screen we have other workshops. We've got on Wednesday how to talk to employers at noon. That's in person in Butler Boardroom. We have another version of this. It's mostly really the same content, but specifically for international students on Thursday at 12 p.m. As well as next week, we've got virtual resume station. So if you need a last minute review of your resume, we're there to do that. And then there's virtual on Monday and then an in-person on Tuesday. All this information can be found easily on our website. On the main page, just scroll down a little bit and then you'll see things like events and that sort of thing. So, and then we've got the fair Wednesday the 27th from 1 to 4. Okay. Allison, I think I'm gonna go ahead now and share my screen, folks. Okay, so the presentation will probably be out of here in an hour, but I do want to leave, or less than an hour, but I want to leave some time for questions. We're gonna talk about two sort of the two main topics tonight. One is sort of the preparing for the fair, so that when you're interacting with the employer, you're doing the best you can. You're impressing the employer. The employer's job, the recruiter's job, is to source quality candidates for their internship or their full-time jobs, right? That is their job. So they're here to gather up a really sharp, good group of candidates, right? So you want to be in that group. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to we're going to take a look at how the fair works virtually, right? So it's all through Handshake. You have some familiarity already with Handshake, and we're going to walk through that. Now, for some of you who've already registered for the fair, I think we've got 10 folks in here right now. If you could put in the chat, have you already registered for the fair? If you've already registered for the fair, just say a little yes or Y or something like that. Okay, good. I'm seeing yeses, right. So that's what I thought. I thought I was going to have a bunch of yeses. So probably at least half of you have already registered for the fair. Registering for the fair is really, really easy when you go into Handshake. You'll see right when you log in, you'll see information about events. And then the fair is right there. So that's the easy part, but we'll take a look at that. And then we want to make sure all your settings are correct. So that's the kind of mechanical part of the presentation tonight, is you want to make sure your resume is visible to employers. There's some settings that we just want to double check and make sure are all set, so that on 1 o'clock everything's great. You can start the fair and there's no hiccups or issues. If there are, don't worry. We've got a room, like a virtual room that you can go to, where we'll be there to kind of troubleshoot. We usually can deal with those things in a minute or two. There's one of those for the employers too, right? So, and do remember that this isn't something that all of us do every single day, right? So it's okay to be a little nervous about the platform. It really won't be that difficult or confusing. Some of the employers feel the same way. They're a little nervous, right? So they think you're all super experts at this. So the employers get a little nervous that, you're like wondering what's taking them so long. So it's all fine. It's all good. The bottom line is you'll get to interact with employers. They are very interested in talking to you, right? They're here to source quality candidates for their internships and their jobs. So, okay. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Let's see. Okay. All right. So here we are, prepare for the fair. What are we going to discuss tonight? We're going to look at, why are you attending the fair? We're not going to spend a lot of time on that because I think you know why. We do want to talk about sort of preparation steps before the fair. I'm very glad you're here tonight. You have plenty of time, even in your busy schedule, given that it's more than a week, right? To prepare. And prepared candidates going into the fair, if you're prepared, honestly, you're going to be impressive to the employers, and make a very positive impression. Usually over the years, I've worked at AU for 10 years now, and whether the fair is in person or virtual, the overwhelming feedback from employers is the students seemed really prepared. They were ready for this. They knew who we were. They had kind of really good questions to ask. So we want to make sure that, again, we keep that going. So we're going to look at preparing for the fair. And then just talking about how you prepare strategically, what you have to think, what your goals are. Each of you are going to have somewhat different goals, whether it's internship, full-time position, if you're looking for a really specific type of employer, if you're looking for a specific part of the country or world to work in, you're all going to have a different sort of goal for the fair, but we'll look at strategic sort of how you can maximize the experience. A little bit about dress and professionalism. We just want to make sure that that's covered. Again, I think at this point we're pretty used to this, the virtual format, but we just want to make sure it's covered and that people aren't too casual, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then we have some advice and resources about the platform. And again, that's that kind of mechanics. Okay, so that's what we're doing tonight. And then we'll have time for questions. All right. Let's see. So again, why are you attending the fair? So obviously, there's usually the goal of obtaining an internship or job or really connecting with the employers, right? Some folks will really get a very direct connection with an employer. The employers have 6 internships they need to fill or 4 full-time jobs, and you're going to be discussing specific opportunities with them. For some of you, this is the start of an engagement with an employer, right? So if I've got first-year students on the line, maybe you're not looking for right now, maybe you're not looking for right this summer, but you want to start this engagement. And we've seen that where employer or students are working with a recruiter, they've made that connection. They kind of keep it kind of low-key engaged for several months or even a year. And then as the cycle hits, and that's when you're interested in applying, and you sort of warm that up, right? So you've got those. So again, you're going to see they've got job and internship opportunities. You're going to get a little bit of, with your interactions with the employers. If you've not done this sort of formally before, like interviewing, this is a good taste of that, right? And we'll talk more about that. Remember, it's a two-way conversation, so it's not like you have to do everything. You may initiate the conversation, and then it's going to go back and forth. Okay. Again, sometimes this isn't like you're not walking out of the JIF, the Job and Internship Fair, with a job or an internship, right? I don't think I've ever seen that, but there is a sort of a candidate pipeline. Some of them are shorter pipelines, some of them are longer pipelines, depending on the employer and depending on you and where you are. But this is a chance to initiate that. So we have more highlights for you. So we have a YouTube page. Look at that link. No one's going to write that down, I think. But if you Google, or go to YouTube and just hit AU Career Center, type in AU Career Center, you're going to find our YouTube page. And there are really short little videos about some topics on networking that are, we tend to refresh these on a yearly basis. So they're not too stale. So. But please, at your leisure, take a look at those if you'd like. You're also going to see things on resumes, cover letters, interviewing, all that. So, okay. Learning about organizations and other opportunities. You're talking to the recruiters, right? So sometimes you're reading about an organization, which you should do. Absolutely read up on those folks you're going to be speaking with. But you can get this instant exchange. The recruiter is a great representative of that organization, so you're going to have a lot of your questions answered. Okay, and then again, you're going to start the process of applying, right? So, all right. So before the fair, so I know some of you, and we're going to go through this kind of quick, right? So registering, if you haven't registered for the fair, this is sort of a really, you can head in on the opening page of Handshake. You'll see kind of a little bit down slightly on the left events, right? And the thing that you'll see very quickly is the Spring Job and Internship Fair. I do encourage you both to register for the fair, and then also you'll be able to sign up for group presentations, right? And also you'll be able to sign up for one-on-one meetings if the employers have them and if they have them left. I looked last night, I think we had about 47% of the one-on-one slots were taken, so not quite half yet, but we're inching close to half of the spots being taken. So, and we'll talk more about that. But again, you're going to be signing up for these employer sessions. What would be the sort of the least ideal situation is, and tell your friends, this is, showing up at 1 p.m. on the 27th virtually and going, okay, now what do I do? That's going to cause the student a lot of stress, right? And you won't be in that group because you're here tonight. But really, by the time next Wednesday rolls around, you'll have a calendar in Handshake that will say, okay, you've got these group sessions. So group session is the employer's giving a presentation like this, right? So, it's not it's not one-on-one interaction, but you're getting information. So they're giving a very specific presentation on their jobs or internships, right? So you can sign up for those. And then some employers will also have one-on-one where you're signing up for a 10-minute slot. Handshake's going to kind of store all that for you. It's nice. You're going to see everything in your personal calendar. Okay. So, but you want to sign up for those. I would say start looking at those tonight, right? Grab them tonight. If there's some employers their spots are going pretty quick. There's a few employers, I'll be honest, that have their signups are full already, right? And it's the usual suspects, right? So I think State Department spots are all filled up. Some employers have more spots than others. Go tonight, take a look, or tomorrow. And you can again sign up for these. Then there's the process of sort of preparing, right? So do you have I think at this point you probably have your resume, but if you need another look at your resume, we've got the events on Monday and Tuesday of next week. Those are drop-in style events, both virtually and in person, right? We do it in the Career Center. So, you've got your materials, right? You'll have all that ready. And then making sure that information, your resume is public on Handshake. You'll have the ability to submit resumes to employers as well. So we'll show you how that works and just give you some visuals. But Handshake, the system is not that complicated, right? Sometimes a question comes up, but it's not that, they've made it pretty straightforward. They've been refining the fair tool, if you will. So it's gotten pretty streamlined. And then of course you want to make sure that, your connectivity is good. I think at this point you all have a good handle on that by now, but it's, good to check. Okay. So again, for registering for the fair, looking on Handshake, right? You see the big messages pop up. This is in the events section. And just clicking a button is going to register you. Then you'll see are these, again, there's the group sessions. You'll see those are about half an hour. Now, one thing you won't be able to do is you can't obviously have things that overlap, right? You can only be in one room at a time. So, sometimes you'll have to make a choice, right? Do you go to this session or that session? But, and again, even the group sessions, it looks like the max is 50. So some of those will fill up. So it's as soon as you can, go in, take a look at these employers. You'll see a blurb about them. If something looks good, grab that spot. If in your further research, you're like, well, actually, that looked good initially, but maybe I don't want to do, maybe, I need that spot for another employer, or that it conflicts, right? You can always kind of withdraw from that, right? And I would do that before Wednesday, before the fair. Okay. But yeah, so take a look at this. The one-on-ones are 10 minutes long, right? Now, I don't know if that sounds great to you or a little scary, the 10 minutes. It's okay if either answer is okay. I want to talk to you about why it's great, though, the one-on-one sessions being 10 minutes. So if you've been to an in-person fair in Bender Arena, you know that it's crowded. There's a lot of people around you. There's a lot of people talking all at once, right? And you probably get, with a lot of employers, you might get 3 minutes, right? 4 minutes, maybe. So 10 minutes, you have this nice, quiet, dedicated time. You're going to talk a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in that employer, how that matches your professional interests, right? And it's going to be a back and forth. It's not you talking for 10 minutes. It's okay if you use 9 minutes and not the whole 10. That's fine. Maybe you use 7.5. That's all good, but you have at least 10, and it's going to be a back and forth. I would prepare, your elevator pitch, your professional introduction, which the Career Center can help with, which you'll find on our YouTube channel. You'll find information about those as well, right? All right, so these are the sessions, okay? So you'll see some employers are only doing group and they're not doing any one-on-ones. There might be some that only want to do one-on-ones and not group, but a lot of employers will be offering both of these, okay? And what they'll do with the group sessions is I've seen some employers are offering, the group session from 1 to 1:30 and then 2 to 2:30. And then in the kind of half hour that they have off, they're peppering in, 3 one-on-one sessions. So you'll see sort of that when you're taking a look. Okay. When you go through and look at the sessions, you'll see the option to follow. This is a very good idea. These are sort of examples. If you haven't already, I think some of you probably look through this, so this looks very familiar. But you're seeing, what the employer entries are looking like there, right? All right. Strategy for the game plan. Have a plan, right? That makes it less stressful for you. And then, you're coming off that much more confident when you're talking to an employer. And this is true whether it's a virtual fair, an in-person fair, even a networking night, where it's not always about the job or internship entries. Research the employers. If ever we hear from employers, if there's one thing, and this isn't just AU, right? When I talk to recruiters who go all over the place, the number one thing that they're like, oh, I wish was different, was they sometimes feel like the student comes up to the table or engages virtually, and they can tell pretty quickly the student has no idea what they do. Now, some students kind of like really dig into that and go, what do you do, right? And what you're doing if you say that is you're broadcasting to the employer, I did no background research on this, right? And the employer will talk to you usually, but they're saying very basic stuff that you could have learned on the website. You could have learned through what they have in Handshake. What you want to do is have a good idea about that employer. It doesn't mean you have to memorize, 23 facts about each employer, certainly not. But having an idea, keeping notes. The nice thing about a virtual fair is you could be at a desk with your notes, have a page for each employer. You're going to have maybe a couple of interesting facts that you learned on the website. Maybe it's programs or specific internships, specific jobs that you really want to talk about, right? This signals to the employer, they did their research ahead of time. They're serious, and that is one of the hallmarks of a quality candidate that they're looking for. Okay. So take a look at that. Also, come up with a few questions based on what you're seeing. especially about the job positions. You know, if it's a full-time job and you're curious, you know, through your research, they have an office in DC and New York and LA and London, you know, like ask about, maybe you're asking about, you know, what's the likelihood of moving between the offices, you know, that's a kind of an interesting question to ask them. So have a few questions to engage with. Others will come up as you talk to them. Okay. You can't talk to all 92 employers, right? There's no time for that. So again, you have your sort of star employers and go tonight, take a look. Who are the ones you want to talk to? Okay. You know, for those of you interested, the one downside, I'll be honest, about a virtual fair is there are a few employers that can't utilize this format, right? And I think you know which ones those are, right? So the intelligence community is usually not able to engage this way, but take a look. We have a really nice listing of employers. I do think we have, though, even though I've said that, I don't think that's true of all intelligence community employers. So take a look. I think we've got one or two on there, or they're organizations that have an national security function. So, you know, they'll be there, but there are a few that come to the in-person fairs that won't be here. But take a look, pick out your top employees, make your list. You know, there may be the number one employer and then number two, and basically base your engagement. Can I get a group session and a one-on-one with my top 3 or 4 employers? That's the way you want to do it. Okay. Again, I mentioned questions, coming up with questions, and really do a bit of that research. That you know, the planning you've done to go into it really, really impresses an employer. I'll be honest, not every student does that, not just at AU, all over. So the ones who do stand out. Okay, so privacy settings, we're going to go into a little bit of detail about privacy settings. This can trip people up a little bit if everything in Handshake. Usually the defaults on Handshake are toward privacy, right? And then you have to consent to having your resume viewed, for instance, by employers. So you're going to want to take a look at that. And then work authorization, that usually has to do with, are you legally allowed to work in the United States? Okay. Another topic is GPAs. So it's a good idea to have your current GPA in the system. And then again, you know, if you've been here you were here in the fall and it's the spring, you have a GPA, right? So I would list that. And if you're a brand new transfer student, for instance, or a brand new student at AU, you can list your most recent GPA from another institution, right? So it's a good idea to have those. Again, some of these things that we're going to talk about now, you know, for instance, giving employers access to your resume, these are things you can always change. So you can configure them one way for the fair. When the fair is done, you can switch it back. Okay, no problem. You can do that. You can change that whenever you'd like. Okay. Profile visibility, right? You'll see usually the defaults are to private. Okay. I would say we're recommending you set it to community so that you can participate in the group sessions, right? So if you had it set to just employer, because there are other students in the group presentations, that would cause a problem, right? And it's going to probably block you. So you want to set the profile visibility to community. Some of you may already have this setting, right? And then you'll see for employers, if you have it set for community, you'll be able to go to one-on-one sessions and group presentations. If it's just set to employers, you'll only be able to do the one-on-one sessions. Okay. And again, to find that, you know, under your profile, click on your initials and then go down to settings and privacy. Okay. This question, so again, this is a question that impacts everyone. Everyone has to answer this. Are you legally authorized to work in the United States? Right? And you'll see that, yes, no, and then will you now or in the future require visa sponsorship? So there's a bit of nuance to that. So, and again, this specifically focuses on international students. So, because their answers may be yes, no, 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 like there's different variations. US citizens and permanent residents would say, yes, you're legally authorized, and no, you don't need a visa, right? So, but if you have questions about that, we can discuss. And if you're an international student, we'll go into more detail about this at the Thursday noon session. And also, I'll be joined by a colleague from ISSS who can answer very specific types of questions about that.
Excuse me, Brian, we have a
Yes.
question in the chat or
Oh,
in
thank
the
you,
Q&A
Allison. Okay.
section.
Yeah.
Sure, it says, do we have similar fairs in the fall?
That's a good question. So we always do a fall fair and a spring fair at AU, right? During the pandemic when it was not, we couldn't gather in person in these huge groups, we had switched to virtual fairs, right? Um, and then as things, as it was safer and we're able to come together more easily, then we transitioned back to in person. I would say there's always a fair. The reason the fair is virtual this spring is Bender Arena is offline, right? Bender Arena is getting they're improving it, right? So they've got to take it offline. So we weren't able to access Bender Arena for this fair. So we had the capability to do virtual fairs, and we actually got a pretty strong positive response from employers. Some employers like virtual fairs, but or they like both. They can operate, both modalities easily. But yes, we do have always have a fall fair, always have a spring fair. We also, those are the ones we host, right? Like this. We also collaborate with the universities in and around DC to do virtual fairs. So I would say usually the modality now will be in-person fall fair, in-person spring fair, right? Barring Bender Arena access. And then we will participate in sort of DMV fairs with Georgetown, with GW, University of Maryland, George Mason, Howard, that sort of thing. We will work with those on certain like focused fairs. So there may be an education fair. Georgetown usually hosts like it's like government education nonprofits. They do like a focused fair for that, and that's often virtual. So you'll see kind of a mix. But yep, we've got fairs in the fall. Long answer for a short question. We have them in the fall and in the spring. And it kind of depends on, when you can engage an employer. If you, let's say you're looking for fall internship, it's okay to go now, talk to that, kind of get in that pipeline, right? Have that conversation with a human being from the organization you're really interested in. And then, it may be the pressure's not on. Also, first year students, if you want to experience this, right? Even though I would say our usual modality is not virtual for the big fairs, in your life, you will now see virtual fairs. There are virtual fairs everywhere. A lot of, especially really big employers, like to go to virtual fairs. Maybe they can attend. The nice thing about a virtual fair is we may have employers from the West Coast, right, that wouldn't travel here for this necessarily. So, but virtual, it's good to get experience with virtual fairs as well as in person. You're going to see a mix. So, all right. Again, here's information. So you'll see down in the lower left there, there's individual sessions, 9 open sessions, one-on-one, right? So you're going to click that and it's going to show you, the 110 to 120 is open, the 130 to 140 is open. You'll see that. It's sort of, if you've made appointments, career advising appointments, with Handshake. It has a little bit of, it almost feels like that a little bit, right? And again, where to add GPA. So this is Katina. Katina works in our office, but she's also a student at AU. You'll see in the lower right-hand corner of your education section, right? So the grayed out boxes, that's usually information you can't change. We pull that from the registrar's office. That data is pulled fairly frequently. So if you've, if you update, you change your major or you add a minor, that sort of thing, you'll usually see that updated, weekly or so. Sharing your resume. So if you go into your documents, right, up on the upper right, you'll see your document section. You want to make sure that you have a resume visible to employers. You can have, you can have multiple resumes stored in Handshake, and you have one that's visible, right? So you may have different versions, or you may have some that are in process, right? Or you're editing, but you can have your visible, you want to have a visible resume for employers. Okay. And you can see that with the one-on-ones, they're going to be able to pull that up. So it's, that's how you share. Whereas in person, you might hand them a physical copy of your resume as you're talking to them. With Handshake, you can be chatting, they can pull it up. All right. And then you're going to be able to share your resume with employers, even if you're not in a one-on-one session with them, and if you're not in a group session with them. So these are called resume drops. This is an adaptation. We would do this in person as well. The employers know that maybe they can't get not every student who wants a one-on-one with them can get one, or you may have a conflict with two employers. You can only go to one group session at a time. So there's a way, what will happen with these employers will get a bundle of resumes. Okay, so you can drop it with some of the employers. You can expect a high of 63 degrees Fahrenheit and a low of 31 degrees. Sorry, everyone. Alexa's telling me the weather right now.
There is another question in
Oh,
the chat,
sure.
or
Thank
in
you.
the question answer.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay, great question about sort of timeline. I'm looking for a summer internship. When can we expect the employer to respond after we meet and apply for an internship job that they offer? So at the fair, if you're in a one-on-one session, I would say a good question, if they don't supply this information, is say, what's the timeline like after we submit, where we would be hearing back about interviews, right? Or not, asking them that. And yeah, so I would ask them that and take notes on that. Okay. If yeah, and in a group session, I think there might be the ability to ask questions in the group as well, but that's a question that you would ask them directly. So that varies quite a bit by employer, honestly. Some have, big employers often have automated systems that will send you something with a timeline. Smaller employers might not have that ability, but that's going to be all over the place. And honestly, the bad news is some employers you never hear from, right? I think those of you who've been applying to internships or full-time jobs, you know this to be true, right? But yeah, that's a great question to ask the employer. So, okay. So again, the day of the fair, if you've already done this, great, but you want to access the fair by clicking in, right? You've already registered, I hope, beforehand, and then just clicking on the events tab in Handshake, career fair, and then, heading in. Or it looks like they're adding a banner to your profile. So we're not hiding, how to get to the fair the day of. Okay. And then, like I said, you'll see a list of your sessions think there's a little calendar tab when you're looking at one-on-ones group and calendar. So you'll be able to look at that. And obviously, make sure that it's got access to camera and microphone. It probably does at this point. So all right. So again, take a look beforehand. Sometimes we get very stressed students who haven't looked at anything until 1 p.m., Wednesday when the fair opens. And then again, will there be group sessions I can attend? Yes. Will there be one-on-one sessions? Probably. But go in now and grab the ones that, there will be ones that fill up, right? So obviously, I don't think I need to go into detail about this. I think at this point, you know what it takes to be able to access the fair. And again, you can only attend one at a time, right? And then there will be some employers, I don't think many, honestly, that will restrict signups based on GPA. The vast majority of employers aren't that focused on GPA. Some who are, let's say, really popular from a broad-based appeal, maybe they're popular because everybody's heard of them, right? Or they're considered an elite employer. Sometimes they'll use GPA as an objective screening criteria to shrink the pool. What will happen though is if your GPA is not in Handshake, that may cause a barrier to you that shouldn't exist if your GPA is meets their criteria. So all right. Afterwards, and these are recommendations for in-person fairs as well as virtual fairs. You want to thank any employer you've met with. You've got their name, you've got their organization, obviously, it's on the screen there. They often will volunteer their email address or it's available to you. Send them a thank you. It doesn't have to be long. It can be a few sentences. You might want to highlight, because you've taken notes during your interaction with them, right? You might highlight something that sounded particularly interesting to them. That again signals to them that this is a candidate who is paying attention, who took some notes, who has this information. So that's a good idea. Think about a lot of these recruiters are very open to connecting on LinkedIn, so you can ask that. There may be some employers who won't do that. I would say federal government employers sometimes are a little cautious about that if they're on there. And then certainly follow their advice or what you've learned to apply soon for these. Now is a very busy time for internships for summer, right? We're starting to people are starting to interview. That doesn't mean all the internships are taken, but really this is peak kind of transaction time for internships for summer. So definitely apply fast. Some of them may be looking for fall internships or, full-time jobs, I would say. Those are beginning to gear up for, for summer starts. So, okay. And again, we have videos. Go to our YouTube page and look at that. Handshake in Handshake. There are, again, for students, there's the virtual fair launch kit. So Handshake has embedded in it information to help you with the fair, okay? But I would strongly suggest signing up for sessions as soon as possible. Don't wait to kind of do exhaustive research on the employer. I would say this looks good from my initial assessment, signing up for a session, then I'm going to do the research. Maybe if you have time this weekend is a good time to kind of, spend some time looking, taking a few notes, jotting down a few questions for that employer. Okay. This is kind of a, example of the one-on-one, what you would see there. Okay. And then again, I know you saw this information already, but we have, how to talk to employers. That is tomorrow at lunchtime up in Butler Boardroom. We're going to talk about what we call the elevator pitch, right? That's that brief introduction. How, when you say hello to an employer, introduce yourself, what you're studying, giving a bit of information about your professional interests, your academic interests. It can be, a combination as it relates to that specific employer, right? So, okay. All right. Why don't we go? I think we have another question. I'm going to leave this up just so people have it. You can obviously register for all of these things in Handshake. Okay. It's always helpful to RSVP for events that you seriously are, going to attend, because again, if there's any updates or information, we could push it out to the folks who have RSVP'd. All right. I'm going to take a look at questions now. Okay, let me see. Oh, okay, great. Allison, you'll have that. Oh, it'll be on YouTube shortly. So, um, any other questions? So this session, you'll find it on our YouTube page. All right, if there are no questions, we are all done. Thank you very much for attending, and I hope you have an excellent experience at the fair. Again, you are going to be very well prepared, and I think you're going to have a positive experience because of it. Thank you very much, everyone.